At long last, you've broken through the hordes of minions, traps, and perils that brought you and your party from level 1 to the upper echelons of power. Now you stand against a dark and imposing figure as it rises from a blackened throne of bones to meet you in epic battle. Hopefully, as you face down your mightiest challenge yet, you think back to how this monster dogged you every step of the way. Now you'll get your chance at revenge, along with preventing the doom of an entire world. No great adventure is complete without an interesting villain to motivate the players. But how do you make a bad guy that is compelling, unique, and maybe even understandable? Starblade talks about making a great villain tonight on Playing God. I'm Nick Logie, and with me is Xander. With great power comes high CR encounters, Nolan.
Hey man.
We're looking into one of the most important aspects of a good tabletop campaign here, which leads us to the first question you should ask yourself. What type of villain am I introducing to this setting?
Well, the villains themselves actually kind of break down to several kind of subcategories. Beyond the fact that this is the bad guy, they can either be one of four general traits. Now, there are more than these, but these are just the basics, and they can be combinations of any of these. The first is the most classic, the unsympathetic villain. This is just a bad dude that does bad shit, and you really, really hate him, and you kind of want to kill him. He has no redeeming qualities. You don't feel for him at all. You've been hunting in this entire game simply for the murder.
This could also be a monster or just something like a high CR encounter
Yeah.
that you encountered initially at maybe like level 1 or 2, or like low power levels if it's a different non Dungeons and Dragons game, and
Yep.
then you eventually got to the point where you could take it on, and then you're just going for it at that point. You're not trying to understand the villain; you're just getting them.
Yeah, a couple of examples of this kind of villain, depending on the CR rating, would be something like a purple worm, or a Baylor, or possibly even the Tarask itself. So it just depends on how you want to play the game, but these are things that you just kind of want to kill.
But it's also generally something you want to build up to some degree. I would actually disagree
Oh,
with the purple
absolutely.
worm example. I would definitely agree with the Baylor or even the Tarask. But actually, the Tarask is kind of a to some extent kind of thing because
Yeah,
it's not necessarily a villain. It's a big monster that's super hard to kill. But
yeah,
a Baylor is actively like, I want to conquer the world. I want to kill all sentient life on the planet or whatever. And it's like something where it's definitely evil. You don't have to question it. You're just like, okay, I know this is a bad guy. Let me go axe him.
yep. Let's ask him a few questions. Uh, the second kind is the most compelling, and that is the sympathetic villain. This is the guy that's doing bad shit, but for potentially a really good reason,
Or at least understandable reasons.
or at least he's understandable. Like a good example of this recently has been like you get the backstory of the bad guys in like movies and things like that these days, and you kind of like, I don't like you, but I feel for you. I understand why you're doing what you're doing. I've got to stop you from doing what you're doing.
You see them rise to villainhood, and you can't completely blame them for taking the path of darkness.
Yeah, like it's one of those moments where you're like, damn, if I were in that situation, would I do that? Possibly, because
Sympathetic villains are actually what we're going to be focusing on for probably most of this episode, as
yeah,
unsympathetic are fairly straightforward, which is why we started off with them, because everybody knows what an unsympathetic villain is. It's a bad
yeah,
guy who laughs
it's the
and
bad
has
guy.
green fire drawn around them for whatever reason, and then you just go and get them.
Yeah,
But sympathetic, let's focus
sympathetic.
on that a little bit. So it doesn't necessarily have to end at any point in time with you like going over
Facing
to the
down.
villain's side or even facing them down directly. It
Yeah.
might your climactic confrontation might be a conversation instead of
Hmm.
everybody's hucking meteor at each other.
Yep.
It could just be like even I've never tried something like this before, but possibly even like a heated debate where you are versus the villain, but you're not trying to convince each other. You're trying to convince the crowd that's assembled. Because whichever
Yeah.
side wins this encounter, the other side is going to get overwhelmed by the masses who just are like, yeah, that's right, fuck you. Let's go kill all these adventurers because we think that the villain's right. They're not going to use
Yeah.
those terms. They're going to be like, that villain is correct. But you're going to get some
Yeah.
kind of similar thing.
Yep. Another way that you could deal with this is by the time the campaign comes to its end. Now, I would stay away from this if you're a newer GM, simply because it might feel anticlimactic for your players. But I've seen it implemented beautifully on a couple of occasions, and that's it's the end of the campaign. The villain has done their thing, and then you come to them, and they're like, "I've completed what I wanted to complete. I know that I have to atone for the sins that I have made, but I have made these sins for these reasons. You are aware of these things. It is now time for you to take your vengeance. I won't even fight back." That's a possibility, but you got to be really
Yeah, I
careful
would
with
I
stuff
would
like that.
generally stay away from that unless it's like a heavy role play game where it's like maybe combats every now and
Yeah,
then, and like this would be a satisfying ending to just be like, yeah,
yeah.
look at
You
what
got to make
you've
sure that you
done.
can make it satisfying.
One way to choose one of these villain types, and there are two others that I want to briefly touch on before you like go full hog into this, because the
Oh
others
yeah,
are pretty self-explanatory. The first is a decoy villain, and that is a villain that might is not like the big bad end guy. Maybe this villain is under the heel of a much mightier, darker villain.
yeah.
This is just somebody who will take the spotlight and guide the players toward that confrontation, but eventually they'll find out that it's like this is not the main bad guy.
Yeah, it could typically be like one of the lieutenants or like the general of the army. It's like that's our bad guy, and then on his deathbed, he's laying there just coughing up blood, and you guys are like a level 8 adventuring party, and you're like, "Is this really the end of the game?" And he's like, ah, "You may have defeated me, but my lord, you will prevail." Ah. And then just kind of like, "Wait, what? I
Yeah,
thought you
then
were the bad guy."
you get a hook, you get some decent like motivational character development, like, and you get an entire new chunk of the campaign to go do stuff at.
Yeah, it's like, "Your lord? Who the fuck is your lord?" And now figuring shit out begins. And welcome back to level 1.
and and the final villain type, which if this one, it's just an unknown villain. You don't
Yeah,
know who you're going up against. You don't even know if there's somebody to go up against to begin with.
yeah,
So if you want to like if you want a story that really involves like chasing down a villain or like focusing on like the character aspects of the villain, then don't go with the unknown because that the
nah.
villain should be known in one way or the other throughout pretty much the entire campaign.
Yeah, they've got to
However,
constantly be taunting or teasing the players if you want to have any kind of growth as that particular villain. If they don't know who's pulling the strings, they could just be a lich, and then, all right, we figured out it's the lich. Now we go to his lair. We defeat his lair, and then lich death,
or
and then that's
worse,
it.
your players don't care when the reveal happens.
Oh,
That's one of the big things about unknowns that you gotta keep an eye out for.
mhm.
Because if you have this cool villain, but it's all only known to you, then when you get to like some big reveal or maybe the defeat of this lich that you've theorized, then it just won't be interesting to the players because it'll
Yeah.
just be like, okay, we've downed another bad guy. Who gives a fuck? Like I actually have a decent example of a Pathfinder game that I played where I encountered this as a player. I didn't know who the villain was, like the main villain of the game. We
Yeah.
just found out eventually that there was like this big undead army headed by a lich, which is why I brought it up. Because Xander, you brought up the lich, and this is a real thing that happened to me. And so we go and we have like this epic battle. We were crazy overpowered, by the way. We had like Gestalt characters, which meant we were double leveling every time. I think I was playing like a level 24 or 26 character going into this
Jesus.
final thing, but so was everybody else. Now, the campaign scaled appropriately to that too, which meant a lot of dice and a lot of damage. But after I fought this freaking epic battle with a Dracolich, like above the armies of the undead, where I was trying to finagle teleporting myself as this barbarian who couldn't fly to fight a dragon. But eventually, we get to the top of this like tower that's like sucking souls out of people or something, and we come across this lich who doesn't really say much, and we just end up kind of fighting him. Like it was a really cool dungeon getting up there and like the
Yeah.
battle and all that. But once we got there, it was just like we fought him, he died, And then we went through like this kind of semi-convoluted thing where we had to kill him from, or like kill him again before he could like reincarnate himself. It's like a play on the mechanics of how a lich works. And
Yeah.
like I love that campaign. Like, don't get me wrong, I had a great time that whole thing. But as in terms of just like the villain, I didn't care. Like I had more conflicts through like the other party members than I did with the lich.
Yeah. Uh, a great place for the unknown. And Nick, I know you use this quite a bit, and I've used it from time to time. The unknown villain should not be your big bad guy, but it should be used within your campaign as sort of a minor villain. Not necessarily like a decoy one, but more along the lines of it's a side quest that you guys got to deal with, and like people are disappearing or there's things happening that's, and then you find the dude that's behind it, and you know all along that he was it. That's a great place for the unknown villain. A really good location that I remember distinctly from Nick's campaign, Legends of Latir, where the unknown villain was actually masquerading as one of the other NPCs, and we were trying to track down. It was a whodunit murder mystery thing on a
Oh
boat in the
yeah,
middle of the
that.
desert. That's a great place for the unknown villain. This should not be your big bad guy, and it should never ever just end in death until you give them a little bit more to kind of bite a hold of. Otherwise, it's going to be anticlimactic, and you're like, we killed him. Now we'll take his stuff.
Yeah, pretty much. I like deploying the unknown enemy when it's feasible that this unknown enemy that I obviously have some kind of backstory for, even if it's really minimal.
Well, yeah,
Um, like when it coincidentally interacts with what the players are doing, because something that I always keep in mind, and maybe not track to like the nth degree or whatever, but I always figure out like what would they do if the players weren't around. So if this unknown villain happens to be doing something evil in the vicinity of something where the players are at, then they're going to probably notice that. Then you have the option of whether or not they actually want to go and do this adventure, or if they just want to say, I don't care about what is going on that half of the village, they can fend for themselves, and then you just go and do something else entirely. That way, you don't have to spill the beans on all of your unknown villains, machinations and everything like that. Um, but it's there if you need it, and you can maybe twist that into the story a little bit later, especially if you like the villain and don't want to have it go to waste.
oh yeah,
But let's talk about like what kind of villain kind of goes well with what game. So obviously we just talked about the unknown. Now decoy is kind of its own thing, but let's talk about the unsympathetic villains. These are great for if you are doing a like just a power gamey go get 'em style dungeon crawler.
meat grinders.
Yeah, meat grinders, like
Great
beer and
place for
pretzels
the
games. Like you just,
unsympathetic.
it's a weekend, and you're just like, it's Saturday. Fuck it. Let's just spend the day beating the hell out of random monsters or whatever. That would be perfect for the unsympathetic villain. There's not much to think about, other than oh they bad, and then
They
just
they super bad and doing bad stuff all the time.
then you just fight them, and then it's just a
Yeah,
it's like I mean it's more gamey at that point, but that's kind of the
yeah,
style of this game that the unsympathetic villain is best suited for.
yeah. The unsympathetic villain is also really good for modules and things that aren't necessarily going to be a fully fleshed out campaign. If you're doing like a 2, 3, maybe a 4 shot, like short campaign, or maybe even just a 1 shot, you don't really have the time to help the players invest themselves in a sympathetic villain. So an unsympathetic villain gives them a clear direction, it's a clear location, and it's a clear we need to beat this guy. He's bad. He's super evil. Or
You bring up a good point, Xander. Like, especially with modules, there's probably going to
yeah,
be an unsympathetic villain built into it, and
yeah,
this is important because, like, you definitely want to use an unsympathetic villain if you have no intention of changing their motivations or what they're planning to do throughout the course of the campaign.
oh,
Even if
absolutely,
despite if it's like a one-shot session or if it's a 1 to 2 year long campaign, if you don't plan on the characters, like the player characters, meaningfully able to change what the villain is doing or how they're doing it or something to that effect, then you go
then
with an
no.
unsympathetic villain.
Yeah, just go with an unsympathetic. If you don't have the time to invest in it, just
I
make it
mean,
easy
like,
on
I
yourself.
mean, you always overplan, as we all know, Xander. But
Yeah,
like this,
I do. I really do.
because you can still overplan with an unsympathetic villain. But
Oh,
this
absolutely.
this is more about like what your group wants. Because you could mix and match multiple villains also into the same like campaign as I've done. But like your main big bad guy, then you want to keep them unsympathetic if they are, like I said, just going to be doing their own thing. Now, a much more complicated villain that is much more interesting, I think, is the sympathetic villain. This
Absolutely, I
is the
agree.
one that I will use more often than not because think about real life for a second. Everybody, no matter how evil you think they actually are in real life, they don't think they are. Nobody has ever gone around. I don't think anybody's legitimately gone around and said,
Yeah, no.
"I stand for the forces of evil and darkness. I'm going to murder and pillage and whatever because it is evil and that's what I stand for." And they're like,
Yeah.
"What?"
Like even Hitler did not believe he was evil and doing bad things to Germany. Hitler did not believe that. He was.
I like to. I don't like to make it so realistic. Because everybody knows me already. I don't like to make it so realistic in my game to have it be to the effect where it's just like I don't think I'm doing. I think I'm doing the right thing, but everybody else is like, no, you're totally doing evil, and then et cetera, et cetera. I kind of like having it more about the villain is there and they know they're doing not maybe the best thing, but they still think that maybe like it's correct in some way. Like sacrifices need to be made. You can't have an idyllic utopian world, so somebody's got to get their hands dirty, and it's this villain.
Yeah. Even if it's for reasons that, they're like, yeah, I know I'm doing bad shit, but I kind of got to do this bad shit. Otherwise, these other worse things are either going to happen or they're already happening and I got to stop them because nobody else is willing to get their hands dirty.
Or perhaps it's something as simple as vengeance, because a sympathetic villain doesn't need to try to do good in order to perceive themselves as, at least okay. This could be just like you could even have like a character with a backstory for something like this, especially if it's like an evil character that you're bringing into your game for some reason. And it's just like you basically learn about the villain who has like maybe they were enslaved at an early age and they just saw like the untold bitterness of the world that your setting is in, and they've gone through like trauma after whatever, and eventually they're just like, you know what? I don't think
Fuck it.
any of you are worth it. I think everyone deserves to die. So
Yeah.
I'm going to become a lich so I can grant everybody the peace of undeath or something like that.
Yeah.
And
The
then you're
super
like,
duper nihilistic.
and then like, or maybe even not that grand of a scale, but at least it's just like when this person gets power and they like get high level magic, they will come back to where they like their story began and just fuck shit up. Like
Mm-hmm.
whoever's there, like whatever CR1 like taskmaster you have around there is just going to be annihilated by this super vengeful dark lord who's come back to exact their vengeance.
Yep. Vengeance is almost always the MO of a sympathetic villain because you kind of get it. You really understand why they're doing the thing. They're just doing it really bad. And that's one of the things that you'll really like you love to hate about them. And you could take this and kind of apply a bit of a sliding scale left and right to how evil they actually are. Whether they believe they are or not is completely irrelevant, but you can judge their actions based on different things. Like a sympathetic villain can also have like a weak spot for like, say they would never hurt a child ever, and you come to deal with them, and you see him off in the distance. You're like, hey, that's that bad guy right there, and he's fucking up like 4 or 5 like big dudes. And then after he does, you see him like lean down over the top of this mound of almost corpses, and you see him pick up a small child and just kind of hold them close, and then walk towards a building where he's going to take care of this kid until he can get back to his family because he did not approve of this kid being kidnapped and some shit like that. That's a great place for that kind of thing
Or
to
if you
kind of
really
give the
want to
players a
confuse
little
your
bit of
if you want to confuse your
yeah,
players, then you have this villain also cast some kind of healing magic at somebody.
yeah,
I'm thinking more like, yeah, he heals the child and then or like closes up the wounds and then he maybe just lets the child go or something like that. I mean, this sliding scale, Xander, by the way, is why Dungeons and Dragons has an alignment system.
yeah. Well, yeah, I guess so.
Like the slide, I mean, I didn't want to interrupt you with that simply because not all games have alignment systems, so it was a
Yeah,
good thing to flesh out. But if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, I would definitely recommend just look at the like the part of the alignment system, law, neutral, and chaos, because that will inform how you're like kind of what your villain's going for. Because the example you just gave was maybe a good example of a lawful evil villain, where yeah, if you
yeah,
stand against him, you're gonna die. There's no mercy. But if you're a kid, then he will like that's the thing. You never will not fuck with kids.
yeah. And he will like he's like very he follows a strict code of conduct regarding his own people. He never mistreats his followers and things like that. A good example of a sympathetic villain from pop culture is Sesshomaru from Inuyasha. He's a bad dude. He's constantly trying to kill his freaking brother, and he's constantly doing bad shit. But he's got this kid walking around, and he kind of mistreats Jockin a little bit. But yeah, this little girl, he just kind of dotes on her a little bit and just lets her follow him around. Um, and unsympathetic, however, is Naraku. That dude's straight up just an asshole. Straight up, he's just a murdering piece of shit, and you kind of want to kill him.
And it all depends on what kind of story that you want to tell out of it. Because
Yeah.
I actually didn't recognize any of those names that you just said.
Oh, you
Um,
didn't?
no, I did not watch Naruto that much. And last
The,
time
the
I saw
Inuyasha.
Inuyasha. Oh, I barely. Sorry, I thought Naruto for some reason.
Yeah.
No, Inuyasha. I have never like watched maybe more than like 5 or 6 of those episodes because
Ah, that's fair.
back when it was on, it was only on Toonami or like maybe it was Adult Swim back then, like late at night. So it was just
Yeah.
like whatever random episode they happened to be showing, which I couldn't watch every day because I was like 12 or something.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't watch the show, and I haven't really gotten back into it as an adult. But basically, what we're getting at is it comes down to the game style that you want. And
Yeah.
I typically will use sympathetic villains, especially for longer campaigns, because then you get
Oh yeah.
more mileage out of your villain. The players get to learn more about just the lore, and it's not thrust upon them because you're like doling this bits of information out over the course of the campaign rather than just being like, here's everything about the villain, go.
Yeah.
And if that, I mean, it's a great way to run a game. But sometimes you do just need, I mean, maybe not even like maybe like it's just a straight up mindless evildoer might be the
Yeah.
best solution to what you
It
have to do.
sometimes it is. It just depends on a myriad of different factors. How long your campaign is, what system you're running. It can be something as simple as you don't want to NPC anybody that's got any more complexity than nah, I'm evil and
Yeah,
I'm going to do evil things.
yeah. If you
That's
listen to
perfectly
our
fine.
evil campaign podcast episode, then like a lot of this comes down to what you as the GM are comfortable doing and what you're
Oh yeah,
comfortable putting at your table because there are some themes where you could get real dark real quick if you're role playing your villain pretty hard, and
yeah,
then the next thing you know, you're not having a good time at the game. You're like stressed out, and then that's affecting the rest of the table.
yep. Another good thing to look at, regardless of what kind of villain you have going, whether they're going to be the big bad guy or whatever. Um, Kind of figure out how important are they to the story and kind of rank them based on back effectively how dastardly they are.
You're
Some
just
of
reading
the
my notes. Like it's how dastardly. Basically,
yes,
what we're getting at is you can make a villain without having them be the main villain. You can make
yes,
major or minor villains. You could have tons of villains in your campaign, especially if it's a longer one. You're gonna want more than one.
oh
So,
yeah,
but this is kind of like a way to gauge like how influential they're going to be to the rest of the campaign when the players inevitably interact with them or they inevitably act at the players. Then,
Yeah.
if you just have a minor villain, like a few handful of minor villains, like for a campaign, is perfect because then you have like a few named bad NPCs or monsters or
Yeah.
however you're rolling it. Then that the players can target, and then they can, they could when they strike them down, it's just like, all right, we've dealt a mighty blow to this fictional organization, and we still got like two more heads of this Hydra to cut off, and we got like this guy and this guy that we still got to fight. So they have the accomplishment of actually overcoming one or more of the villains without it just shutting down your entire plot.
Yeah. Also, sort of the next thing to figure out is, depending obviously on how long your campaign is, how much screen time are they going to get? How are they going to interact with the players? And is it going to be like you're following the breadcrumbs and kind of figuring out how they're doing their bad deeds? Or do they just straight up show up like at the inn that the players are sleeping at and be like, I'm going to do terrible things to you while you sleep. Ha ha ha. And interrupt their long rest. Uh, your villain, depending on how.
Your nightmares will be filled with even darker nightmares, and you will wake up and you will be hungry again, but you will have no food for I have taken it.
That's just that's. I think there's another kind of villain is the comedic relief villain. It's like the bad guy that's doing like he thinks he's doing bad shit, but it's really like
Well, so
minor stuff.
that's
Just an
actually that's why I
inconvenience.
grouped them into the four types, because you could put this guy into any of those four groups that we listed earlier.
Yeah. It's like he just goes around stealing the player's food or some shit. And it's just a minor annoyance.
Yeah,
You're
it's
like, ah, we
it's
gotta-
just something that he does. It's just a pain in the ass, and that's pretty much it. You get 1 XP for dealing with him.
I don't want to kill him because
So, but you asked
needs that food.
you asked a lot of big questions and a lot of important questions there, which is why we wanted to start off with these villain types that we laid out. Because one thing that you will immediately notice is for half of those questions you don't want to use the unknown type, because
No.
the answer is automatically no, they're not going
No.
to show up. No, they're not going to be sprinklings of whatever. And no, they're not going to follow breadcrumbs to the villain. He's just going to show up, and who knows what can happen after that.
Yeah. Sudden villain is unknown and not. I don't know. I like the unknown villain for small
I
stuff.
mean,
nothing
that's
stuff.
what I'm saying. Like, all of these are viable, but
Yeah.
they kind of answer the questions like by themselves in a lot of ways. So with a sympathetic villain and an unsympathetic villain, those, I mean, any of these other than the unknown really, will like they can do all this. Like, this is questions that you ask yourself when you're making the game. Are they going to be harrowing the players? Because maybe every now and then you want to jump in with like one of those half encounters where you like the villain's technically at full power, but you don't actually want them to go full at the players because they'll just die.
Those die. Yeah.
So like maybe the villain's distracted with something. If we could go with like maybe like a James Bond style example where the villain is doing something at a computer to blow up, like to nuke all the volcanoes, to have like giant earthquakes rupture the earth, and they're really focused on trying to do like the programming or whatever they have set up. And so in this encounter, you would see the villain on stage. They wouldn't be coming at you with like their full CR-18 power, but they're there, they're doing something. Maybe every once in a while they'll pull a gun and pot shot at you, but otherwise you're fighting their minions. Like you're fighting the henchmen. You're trying to get to this person, and maybe right as you're finishing up the encounter with the like the minions, and you kind of use that to determine whether or not the villain can succeed in activating this program, or if they have to be like, oh, they're right there, we're abandoning ship, and then they run into like
We gotta go.
they run into the escape pod that all James Bond villains have, and they like launch out into space or whatever, wherever else you put them, like a teleporter that takes them across to another continent. If we're doing magic.
Yeah, super duper magic.
Like, that gives the villain on-screen time where they might even be able to taunt the players actively during combat. And then,
Oh yeah.
but the players aren't necessarily, like, full-on fighting them. Now, it can happen. So what happens...
Totally take place.
What happens when the players decide they are going to engage the villain, like, too early? So they get up there, and you've decided as the GM that the villain's going to try to get away. But the players are trying everything they can to stop that. So At what point, Xander? At what point would you just be like, okay, you're fighting them for real now?
I think that what should be done in a situation like that, because this is D&D, it's free form. This is something that's going to be changing and altering, kind of metamorphosizing over time. You should look at whether or not the CR is appropriate for the encounter. Maybe make it 1 or 2, but this is a good opportunity to have them players just get their shit wrecked, and then the villain's just like, I don't even know why I was worried about you, and then leaves while the party's just screwed. That's a good place to do that.
What can make sense too, like even if the villain's not trying as hard as they could, like the players are already weakened from the encounters leading up to this, so it's not like they're even at full power.
Yeah. Another thing that could happen is, the villain knocks all of them out, and then all the players who have now suffered this defeat wake up in like a prison cell or something like that. Now the villain's off doing other things, but he's caught the meddlesome players, and this gives your PCs a chance to kind of come back from ruin effectively. And it's a nice, cool prison escape scene, and you get to do cool stuff
Yeah,
like
it's a
that.
good. I mean, I did this in Legends of Latir after you lost to the Worm Skull Raiders,
Yeah.
and she took you back to the hollowed out purple worm dungeon that was their base, and locked you into like the bottommost part of the dungeon with no items and none of your shit. So it
Yep.
was
You got to get clever.
yeah, it was an entire thing of like, okay, we can't get her attention because she kicked our ass at full power already. We can't do that
Yeah.
again. And we got to figure out how to sneak out of here. We're going to break these other guys out, which you guys decided to do. And we're just going to, what we're going to do? We're going to stand in the cell because there's only one entrance. And we're just going to like wait for them to come to us eventually until you just like, you like basically
Yeah.
1v1 to the enemies as they came down because they bottlenecked the fuck out of it until they got smart enough to be like, you know what? If we just leave you down there, you're gonna starve. So we're gonna leave and make you come out at that point. It was a nice back and forth. I really like that.
Yeah.
But
Uh,
if you get to this point, I definitely agree with Xander. Like, don't hold back.
oh no.
If they figure out a way to fully engage with your Baylor at level 3, then they get to fully engage with a CR 21 or 20 monster. So
Yep.
like, too bad.
At that point in time, don't be afraid to kill a character. They picked that shit.
Right. So there's a couple things that you should be careful on because this could also make the game immediately not fun depending on how you handle it. But first thing, I unless like the dice really are really bad luck, then I would try to avoid a total party kill. Like no wipes. Unless it's like either really appropriate or you're playing a game that like a game style where your players know that could be a thing. Because a lot of people
Yeah.
go into D&D or tabletop games like they want to go with their character, have the character get stronger. There's going to be challenges and stuff, but ultimately it's like you're not trying to kill him. But then obviously there are meat grinders where it's just like total party wipe. Okay, fine, whatever. That's just today's breakfast. Let's go to
Yep.
lunch. Is there another party wipe? Okay.
We've made 4 characters for this campaign. We're prepared.
So you got to find that balance. But I would say,
Yeah.
like, regardless of what style game you're playing, if there's like one person who's like 1v1ing the boss and they're just like a fighter or something, not to say that fighters aren't important or anything, but if they're just going toe to toe with a Baylor, don't have the Baylor hold back. He swings the
No.
sword with the lightning on it, and you take like 40 damage, and then that fighter just dies. Like,
Yep.
I'm
Uh,
sorry to whoever's playing that character, but that's part of the story. Like,
yeah.
they're
And,
dead.
and that's how you did that. A good rule of thumb is take the number of players divided by 2 minus 1
What
to a
does that give
minimum of
you?
1.
But what's that equation for?
Uh, Acceptable party kills.
Oh, acceptable party kills. Okay, it makes
Yeah.
sense.
So like if you have let's say a group of 4 divided by 2, that's 2 minus 1, kill off one of them. If you have a party of 5 divided by 2, that's 2 minus 1. Party of 6 is
This
then 2.
obviously goes with the assumption that you're rounding
Yeah.
down.
Yeah, round down a little bit. And the reason why you want to do that is you don't want to kill all of the characters for 2 reasons. One, it will take the death of any of the characters that did die. And if everybody dies or everybody but one person dies, they have to share this. I know this is going to sound terrible, but they have to share their death spotlight with too many other players for it to be meaningful and impactful to the story. And then also, you want to have enough players left over that they want
That they
to
can carry
continue
on the
fighting.
quest. Yeah,
They
that they
want to
can
carry
keep
it on.
going.
They'll pick
I
somebody back up and keep moving.
I can kind of agree with that. I wouldn't do the equation myself, but that's a pretty good tool if you want to use it.
Yeah.
See, I would be hesitant to do this, but I wouldn't, at the end of the day, have much of a problem with wiping out like all but one player if need be. Like that's an extreme example because we're
Yeah.
assuming that that there's bad luck on the rolls. We're assuming that the players decided that they are going to fight this thing that's clearly more powerful than them, and
Yeah. It's got a whip made of fire and you're level 4s.
and that they
Don't
continue to be
do
stuck.
that.
Right, and that they continue to be stuck in after they realize how bad it is. Like if you kill
Yeah.
that fighter from earlier, and the rest of the party's like, "No, we're not going to tolerate that. We're going to fight you." Then I might end up doing a total party wipe if they just keep coming at it. If they try to run away, I might not be like, "Okay, the Baylor just lets you go" or whatever. I'm not going to do
No.
that, but I'm going to
Send
make
a
it
couple
like
minions after him and then give him one last whip crack in the back of one of the players as they're running to kind of knock down a little bit of health. But
yeah, but or I mean,
the
even
Baylor shouldn't chase, his minions should
yeah,
chase.
or like maybe that crack just downs one of your characters but not kills them. So then you have like this intense part where like you got to have somebody carry this person, which slows down
Yep.
movement speed, and then like that also takes away their ability to fight whatever's going on. So like maybe these two minions, which normally would have been like easy sauce, are suddenly like much more difficult, not deadly, but like just
Yeah.
difficult because
Because you're down 2 party members and one of them's straight up dead and your
and
other
that one
party
was your
member is
fighter
being
too. So
carried.
like he's supposed to be the melee dude, so,
Yeah.
and he's not there. And like your cleric was the one who got hit in the ass with the whip. So it's like you don't even have
Yeah.
healing.
Yeah. Uh but be merciless as your big bad guy. Regardless of when they engage, they can be facing off against a Baylor at level 3 and then decide they want to try and go for it. Be merciless. Just try not to TPK. And be just as merciless when they come up to an appropriate level to try and take this big bad guy on. Don't hold your punches back, because one of the things about role playing games and Dungeons and Dragons in specific, that is magical about this game is that you have to overcome challenges, and if they're not challenging, you're not going to give your characters and your players enough of engagement for them to pick your game over, say, playing Skyrim. You
Yeah,
want them to be engaged. You want them to think, oh God, this is not a good situation.
yeah. Let
We
them
can
do
do it,
something
but
that they can't do in a video game.
yeah, we've got a bad situation here, but let's think our way around it. Let's get smart and reward them when they do cool shit, and then penalize them when they do stupid shit.
Like
And
okay, so Xander,
yeah,
even with like a lot of times, if you need to do something like this, if you need to have the big bad guy attack the players, a lot of times one punch is going to be all that you need to put the fear of Jesus into the players. Because if
oh
they get hit
yes,
with 23 damage at level 1, they are going to turn the fuck around and leave. So,
yep,
like, they're going to figure out a way to escape. And then you have
yep,
a cool scene where they get to escape. Maybe even use the chase mechanics.
yeah. Chase mechanics are fun, or they kind of back up and regroup to try and deal with it. Like last Tuesday, my player characters had just finished, or are in the process of finishing an arc, and they've been going through this old hospital, and they're taking down some guards, and they found the secret hidden kind of this secret button that kind of moves a whole wall, and a bed folds up to show a place in the hospital that's not supposed to exist, and they're doing really bad stuff in there. But when they open up the door, they're already a little bit of battle haggard. They've taken on a couple of guards so far, and none of them's dead or hurting at all, not really anyway. But they open the door, and then suddenly Flesh Golem is standing in front of them with a great axe in one hand and a great sword in the other hand, ready to wreck their shit. And they're like, Nope.
And then they
Turn
they
around.
push that button again and undo what they just did.
Well, they had to do an investigation check to try and close that door, but what they did do, which was much more intelligent, was this is a large-sized creature. They tried to funnel it in through a doorway meant for medium-sized creatures, and the moment it came through, they cast a web spell over the top of it. It just kept failing to get out of it. And then while it's stuck there, just pounding on it, just beating the shit out of this thing. And this, relatively strong monster that could one-shot any one of the players, they managed to take it out because they were clever about it. But it should only take you describing the creature and maybe one smack, and they should be like, oh.
So that's a great
Oh.
example for this next point, and that is what happens if the opposite of a TPK happens. What if they win? What if the players somehow do manage to beat your villain? What do you
Well,
do?
well, here's what I do. Whenever let's say for example, my players come up against the big bad guy, and they wreck its fucking shit. The first thing is they had to be clever. The dice were in their favor, and they used all of their abilities to absolute best effect to take down something significantly more powerful than they were. Don't penalize them for that. It's not GM versus players, but now you're kind of stuck in a position. Well, this monster got kind of wrecked. I'm not sure what to do now. And the answer is, if it's the big bad guy for your campaign, the greatest thing that you can do, because you're a GM and you are literally playing God, is that wasn't the big bad guy.
Yeah, it could
It
have been
was
the
just one
decoy
of the
villain
big
all
bad
the
guy's
whole time.
minions the whole time. And they will never know. Don't give away that this is the super duper end boss. And then they go to fight it, they kick its ass, and you're like, well, campaign over? It was a CR25 monster, and you guys are level 4. Congratulations, you are smarter than the people that wrote these books and me.
So there are also some narrative ways to get your villain out
Out of that situation.
or back later
Yeah.
on. And I'd say if you're gonna do something like this for your villain, I'd say like maybe not guarantee, but like think about doing it for a player if something like this happens to them, just to make it even on both sides. So you're
Yeah.
not like just using all of your god powers as GM to make your villain that you like stay around when you wouldn't do the same thing for the players. But here, a way you could kind of narrate the villain out of there is depending on the context of the situation. This could be like um, statements that seem like they have won, like and have crippled the villain. Like this person would not be coming back for a significant period of time. Either they need to like regenerate themselves, or they need to come back to life, or whatever. But this is like narrative points. Like if the
Yeah.
barbarian kicks the villain in the chest, and that's the last bit of HP. They like fly backwards through like some wood walls or something, and the place happens to be on fire, and like the ceiling collapses, and like it looks like they're totally engulfed in flame. And it's just like, yeah, we did it. But in actuality, you've written a way for them to get out of there somehow.
Yeah.
This
They
could
show
also
back up
be
later, they're like, I thought we killed you.
yeah, this could also be like they fall off a cliff and into some water, but you can't see the water, like it's dark or something. So you're like, well, I hear the splash, so we must be good. And it turns out they're back later. Or since there's magic in most settings, then you could straight up bring the villain back from the dead. I would be careful with that because then it kind of like negates all the effort the players put in. But
Yeah.
like if there's like a good reason for the villain to come back, or if it's like it could be a crowd favorite villain. Like if we're thinking Dragon Ball Z, Frieza's a big favorite. Frieza's died how many times? Probably more than Goku. We
Probably.
don't even know. Definitely less than Krillin.
Definitely less than Krillin. He's died
But everybody loves
every
Frieza. Frieza comes back. I wish Cell kind of came back later at some point because I thought Cell was really cool. But like when Frieza came back in like Golden Frieza form, then everybody was like, "Oh, this is cool. This is interesting." it wasn't a letdown, and the character's actions still mattered in the context of the show. But your players just might like a villain enough that you're like, okay, hold on a sec. How do I bring this person back and make it reasonable and also fun? Because once
Oh
you get
yeah,
like you could bring back a villain like I'd say like twice at the most if you really
oh
go
yeah.
this route. But yeah, make it climactic every time they meet the villain.
Yeah, like they show up and like you can see there's a giant scar on the chest where the barbarian just stabbed him through last time, and he's kind of looking down at the characters. He's like staring at the barbarian, like squinty eyed. You may have bested me once before, but I have trained endlessly since our last encounter. You shall not defeat me again. You know,
Yeah.
Dragon Ball Z that shit.
Or like you could like misdirect the players by having them be like, okay, we need to go meet with the prince of this kingdom, and then they're like going into the throne room, and then the throne turns and it's like, you motherfuckers, and it's the guy you killed like 10 sessions ago, and
I was
he's
like, I fucking hate you all.
this is my kingdom now, bitch.
You thought you had bested me, but ha ha ha. You did,
That's
but
when the
fuck
guards
you
in the room
anyway.
really question who this prince is. Like, was he this evil before? I don't remember the maniacal cackling.
All right, and another thing that you can kind of go with along with this is if you're running a campaign, you're going to have more than one villain, and any villain worth his weight in well silver pieces, I guess, uh, should be important to the overall success of the other villains. So let's say you have three main villains. One's the big bad guy, and two are his lieutenants. If the big bad guy gets his ass handed to him for some reason that's not really understandable by the GM, his two lieutenants might not be there. But then they come, they're like, "Our lord, we there. What the fuck happened to you? Oh my goodness. We have to bring him back. He's kind of a dick. No, we have to bring him back. He's our boss. We have to bring him back. Think of how indebted to us he would feel if we brought him back." And so even the big bad guy can be brought back by his lieutenants
Or you could
because
bring
that's
back
what they
like a
would do.
lieutenant if they think the minor villain is cooler than the main
Yeah,
villain. Like you could just be like, "Oh, I really needed this general over in the west quadrant of the city to control the peasants, and we must bring him back. I cannot trust anyone else with this matter."
yeah. Or a real fun kind of bait and switch with that. If your players find that a particular villain is more fun, one of the things that you could kind of embody with your villain is the lead from the front kind of deal. And as your players are growing in power, so too is your big bad villain. And they think that it's just a lieutenant, but what you find out later on is he's actually the big bad guy the entire time. He was the one with the whole machinations. He's just pretending to be one of the lieutenants where
Or
the players are
or
concerned.
he had to level up like everybody else.
Yeah,
Like that, I don't know if I could successfully do that, but that would be a cool idea to have like a villain that starts at like level 2, like an actual level 2 character class, and then like your players start at level 1, and then you encounter them frequently throughout the campaign, and you're like, and you somehow manage to make it so that like at the end of any fight that you have, both sides manage to retreat or something, so you could spare everybody on all sides. That would be tricky to do, but seems like a cool idea.
well, that'd be a lot of fun. That'd be a super duper amount of fun. Because yeah, your villains could try to be getting as powerful as the players. It's like, oh, I heard I heard that one of your foes, my master, has recently learned a spell that has rendered some of our lesser companions completely useless. What do we do? Well, the only thing we can do, we have to also train and get stronger.
Yeah,
Let's go adventuring.
the villains can learn. They can also change. Like if you wanted to bring back a minor villain and they did straight up die, then if you just so happen to have a lich as your big bad guy, then they could be revived in like a different state, like maybe a sentient undead style, like vampire or something like
Yeah.
that, where the villain is back, but they're different, and you got to figure out the new thing that they can do.
Yep. Another thing that you can do where villains are concerned. Now, these only work for minor villains, in my experience. You could probably finagle it into a big bad guy, but minor villains are where it's at. This will make your players hate them so
All right, hit me with it,
much
Xander.
more.
What is it?
Take an important NPC from your player character's backstory and make them working for that bad guy. It is super powerful when the reveal happens. Everybody gasps in fucking horror and awe. And it's like, oh my god. And they're like, I super duper hate this guy now. I didn't like him before, but now I want to use his guts as jump rope.
Or if you
Like,
want to, if you want to take that in the other direction, like from a sympathetic villain, then you got to figure out instead, why did my former ally or family member or whatever, why did they join that side?
yeah. And maybe they didn't really even change it all. They just kind of show up on the field of battle and you're like, what are you doing here? Wait,
It's like
that's
I'm
you
fighting
that
for the
they're
forces
talking
of
about?
justice, and then the other person's like, but I'm fighting for the forces
That's
of
what we're
justice.
doing. Yeah, the whole Civil War, like a brother fighting a brother kind of thing. It's super impactful every time that you do some shit like that. So do shit like that. It's awesome. I pulled that on one of my players once, where in her backstory session, her character's husband died, was engulfed in flames and died. And then 10 sessions into the campaign, it turns out that he didn't die. He was just brought back as a fucking vampire's minion. And now he's not only undead, but he's also under the complete and mindful control of a very powerful creature that they have to try and face off against eventually. And there's nothing that can be done. The player was just like, no, Xander, you didn't know. It was great.
Yeah, that was a great. When I was there for that example,
Yeah,
that was
you
fun.
were.
It wasn't my character, but I was like, oh shit.
Oh shit! It's
But
like,
I was also like, who
it's your
the
husband.
fuck is
What?
this? Because I wasn't there for the backstory game, so I was like,
Mm-hmm.
huh? Because she was freaking out, and I was like, what? What's
What's
happening?
going on? That's my husband. Oh
Oh
shit!
shit.
Holy crap! I did not know. Yeah, it's really fun to pull shit like that.
As an aside example, before we get into like the final question that I have, which is basically how powerful and what kind of power should the villain have. Um, this is something that Jesse, who used to be on the podcast way early on, he did to his players, and they've already heard the whole thing on this, so there's no spoilers here anymore.
Oh
He
hey, hit me
had
with it.
all he had was this funny as fuck Demi-Lich, which all he was like this little skull with a purple diamond shaped thing on his forehead. And if you looked in the monster manual, that's pretty much just what they look like
Yeah, what it
for
looked
some
like.
reason. I don't know why they made Demi-Liches just skulls or whatever, but who knows. Anyway, so he basically had this Demi-Lich just showing up randomly throughout the entire campaign. And he would be doing goofy shit because like they would be like, oh, he's so cute, like sitting there in the bush like trying to gnaw at a rat or something like that with his like little clacky teeth.
Yeah.
And so like they kind of like dismissed him. He was definitely not the main villain, by the way. I don't even think he would count as a decoy villain. But at the end of the day, he was still a demi-lich, he was still a villain, and he was still evil. So eventually, he straight like his plans, like I think straight up killed a couple of the characters' allies, like their NPC friends, and I think actually also killed one of the players, like through not like direct combat, but through all these evil things that it'd been doing and manipulating the players into helping it with. Because it was this cute little skull thing, and it was just like, I'm gonna take over the world, and they're like, oh, that's adorable. And then eventually it was just like, I was serious, and they're like, oh fuck.
Oh
And
damn.
then they had to deal with a real like problem. And it was just
That's
because they
awesome.
ignored it throughout the rest of it, because they would find him in random places doing silly shit, or things that they would perceive as silly shit, but in
Yeah.
reality, he was manipulating all sorts of shit. Because the Demi-Lich is nothing to fuck around with.
Oh no, absolutely not.
It's called a Demi-Lich, but I think it's still like CR 17 or 18.
Yeah, it's pretty rough.
But let's talk about the final question that we really have. How powerful should we make our enemy? our villain?
Well, the the easy answer is as powerful as you need them to be. Uh, but the
Well,
more
then let's
complex and
ask,
more
how do we find out how powerful we need them to be?
yeah, that's the burning question. Is take a couple of take a couple of things into account whenever you're doing this. You don't want to have a CR20 monster that is going to be fighting against your player characters in some kind of grand final battle if the highest level your player characters are going to get to in the campaign that you planned for is level 10, because that's just not fair at
Unless,
all.
well, this there is a stipulation. That is, if this campaign that you got is focused around like getting very powerful magical items or something like that, where it would level the playing field a little bit.
Yeah, maybe,
But yeah,
maybe,
no,
yeah,
I definitely agree with that. Where it's just like
yeah,
calm down on the super big powerful monsters because you want to save those for later. You want to save them for like maybe
yeah,
another campaign or a higher level one, and then
maybe.
because if you just blow the Baylor right out like at level 10, then it's not as cool when these same group of players encounter a Baylor villain as the villain in a different campaign. They're like, "Oh, they probably be like, "Oh, it's this guy again." Instead of like, "Oh shit, what's this?"
No, holy shit, it's Metal Gear.
Yeah, so you're not planning on how powerful it'll be for like just the final battle, but this is also like how it's going to interact with the players beforehand. So when I say power, I'm not strictly talking about high damage numbers, high hit numbers. I'm also talking about like how they use their power. It could just be
Yep.
straight raw force. Like you could have something that could throw comets at people because it's fun. Now,
Fucking awesome.
you could alternatively just have their power based on like political manipulation. Like instead
Yeah.
you have a countess who she's not like a vampire. She's not even like a level 3 character even. Like you just have a CR 1 half basic high elf lady who you've decided to be the villain. Now, she's not going to go fight the players directly. That would be ridiculously dumb on her part. But what
Yeah.
instead she's going to do, so she has like this political power that she wants to manipulate the players into doing stuff. Now, you don't have to have the end goal of the players to be their deaths. You could have her set like put all these missions out that seem like the players could be doing something for the sake of goodness, but in fact all they're doing is like undermining the real justice of the city, and you're just empowering her more. And then next thing you know, then the players are like have wanted posters all over the city because the guard are after them now, and they're like, "Whoa, what happened?" And then like maybe that's when they find out that it's just like I mean, yeah, she betrayed you this whole time. Did you not figure that out?
It's a ruse. It's always been a ruse. No. Another way to look at the power is maybe they have an exceptional amount of monetary wealth,
Oh yeah,
and
money
they're
is the
using
greatest
that.
superpower.
Yeah, and they're using that money to pay armies and people that are very powerful to deal with you. So you don't really. It gives you kind of a moral dilemma. It's like, do I kill this guy who's got a family to feed because the person that hates me is just paying him, or do I try to pay him off? Like, how do you deal with this? And it creates a whole other kind of moral moral dilemma for your players. So that's also another good way to go about how powerful your
Or if you just want a
big bad guy
straight
can
on,
be.
like a straight up crunchy style game, then consider the type of raw force or power that the villain will bring to bear. Is it a mage who will want to do most things from either outside of line of sight or like so far away that they are using the maximum range on a lightning bolt spell to hit your party? Um,
Yeah.
Now, or it could just be like a giant who wields this big ass hammer, and like when it swings it does like 40-12 damage. He gets one attack per turn, but god damn, you do not want to be hit by that attack.
Oh, absolutely not.
Like you could this is about like how maneuverable the villain is, how much access to equipment they have, because maybe a
Yep.
minor villain wouldn't have a magical item. And this is also a way for you to actually distribute magic items to your players based on what you want them
Hmm.
to have. You give the villains cool stuff to use, which then you get to use against the players, and then when the villain dies or whatever, then they get to have the cool stuff to play with.
The players not have it.
Yeah.
Another thing to look at is also uh, what kinds of other people are working for this big bad guy. Like, what kind of allies do they have? Do they have other NPCs or
Yeah, these aren't full-on
uh,
villains that you're fleshing out here. These are like
yeah,
just what kind of allies they have. If go back to the monetary example, like do they have an entire army of people they pay? Do they
yep,
have an entire army of undead minions that they don't pay? Or are you going with a dumbass idea for a campaign and have an army of undead minions that they do pay because they all have a workers' union? And I'm pretty sure that is the plot to a comic I read once.
yeah.
But yeah,
Um,
this is like who's their family, who are their allies. Xander, could you give us a couple examples of what you would come up with for something like this?
well, when I deal with a villain, I typically try to give them people that can be kind of an Achilles heel. But I make these people powerful in their own right. So say a big bad guy is wanting to try and change the political landscape to suit their own needs, but they have a younger sister who really, really disagrees with this and goes to try and help the party. Or they happen to have, uh, in that exact same vein, they have a younger sister who is really disagreeing with what they're doing, and they goes to try and help the party, only to find out that the only reason why the sister was there in the first place was gathering intel on the player characters and trying to foil all of their plots and their plans against her older brother because she was secretly working for him the whole time. There's a million different ways that you can go with it.
That would be a hell of a twist.
Oh yeah, it would be. And it's so much fun. So much fun.
And one final thing that I would kind of add in terms of like, I guess this is sort of applies to allies, but it's really about how the world at large views this villain. Because when we related it to real life earlier, maybe they don't see this person as a villain at all. But since this is a storytelling game, then we're going to assume that at least the populace is aware of some of the deeds that this person has done generally, and but even so, they might still side with the villains, and then you have like then you have a problem where you're going through like maybe a singular country who allied themselves with the villains, where the players have to be on their guard every step of the way while they're in that country, or possibly even world, depending on how gritty you want to make this. And then,
Yeah.
like, so if the players go into a tavern and it looks like a seedy ass tavern, and they're like, okay, maybe we could find some respite here. And they walk inside, and all the heads turn, and then one guy pulls up a scroll and double checks the wanted poster that says dead or alive, and then they're like, get 'em, boys. And
No shit.
then you have a fight on your hands.
Yep. And that also determines whether or not, like, do they have other people, like, say, the populace of the world? Are they siding with the good guys, or are they siding with the bad guys?
That's
Could
yeah, that's pretty much what I was getting at because I kind of made the example a little too specific with the seedy tavern, but you could a random
yeah,
tavern that is in the middle of the city right next to the Capitol building,
yeah,
like all those people, they look at you and be like, oh shit, they're here, call the guard or just get them. I don't know.
get them.
I like getting them. Getting them's a big part of Dungeons and Dragons.
No, absolutely.
But the most important part of this process is designing a villain that you like to play. The roleplay between the bad guy and the players will be all the better if you think the villain you made was cool and interesting. This is all our opinions on the matter, so we'd like to hear from you. Leave a comment telling us about your favorite homemade evildoer, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. We hope you enjoyed listening, and we'll see you next time on Playing God.
Later, man.